when we talk to people who answer the question, they're avoiding their current vendor limitations, and cost came out as the most pressing issue, that licensing is too costly with their existing vendors. And so let's dive, we want to talk about what is this issue about? Have these solutions just gotten too expensive? Is this an OpEx versus CapEx issue? Clearly in the retail industry right now, cost pressures are being felt all around, and we're hearing that from all the clients that we talk to. And I think a couple things might be going on here. When we just talked about flexibility and adding new microservices, I think in many cases when you're going after those microservices, you are paying for that full module of that service, whether you use all of it or not. So part of it is that, and if I could use a charcuterie board as an analogy, I think people may want just the salami on the board, and they don't want the whole charcuterie board, but yet these vendors are forcing them to pay for the entire module, whether or not they're using that feature. And of course, I think we've seen a shift over the past few years that now in terms of how you pay for these things, a lot more is OpEx versus CapEx. And so there's a lot more pressure to bring these licensing costs down. And because of the metered consumption models that most of these SaaS vendors operate on, with the pressure of more and more real-time calls going up the shopping funnel, so looking at retailers that are trying to put an accurate delivery promise or real-time inventory on the product detail page, clearly drives a way more infrastructure and calls to the OMS to pull that off, which can obviously drive the license costs up. So I think there's, that's driving some of these concerns that a retailer has around the current solution being too costly. So I think it's a little bit of both, but I think retailers should realize there are other solutions out there in the marketplaces where you can get microservices that are not metered, and still bolt those onto your existing OMS to get those kind of features, and then also get them down at a sub-component level. Back to my sourcing example, they were just consuming a small piece of that sourcing engine versus buying a completely new sourcing microservice. So I think there's a couple probably themes that are going on with cost. Dave, what's your perspective on this?
So I think really the way I viewed OMS over the last 15 years has greatly changed. If you asked me 15 years ago, it was very purposeful. It was to route orders. And that's really all it did. There was no optimizations, there was no inventory in it. So as the features and functions available in OMS have matured over the years, I'm not sure if our expectations on cost have matured at the same speed. So I think there's just a recalibration of expectations on those costs when you actually look at the features. And when you start comparing to the functionality you're getting out of your OMS to your website, for some reason we're all okay paying for that on our website, but when you get to OMS, which is just as critical, we kind of look at it through a little bit different lens. So I think of it as just a little bit of a recalibration of expectations. Now, with that said, I do think there's certain components in there that are difficult from a cost perspective, and the one I think you brought up was inventory, and that's a good one. So maybe I'll use that as my example. So inventory on a PDP, showing one page at a time, seems to fit within the cost profile mold of I could afford it on the platform. When you start doing a PLP that has 60 different products, and those products have 5 different sizes and 5 colors, so it's 300 inventory calls, it actually starts getting cost prohibitive. And but as an example, like I stood up a separate inventory service for that I'm able to host myself, and it cost me about $50,000 a year. And that was more cost beneficial than using my platform provider. But at the same time, you have to think about like that cost me $50,000 just for that inventory service. Think about all the other services offered in those OMS products. So I think there's a little bit of recalibration, but then I think there's also, you have to look at your own unique business. Not everyone might have 300 calls on a PLP page, so that might not apply to them. So I think you have to kind of look at each individual use case. But inventory is usually the one that usually sticks out as the cost prohibitive one.